Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everyone to today's PFC webinar on the new PFC Project Sourcing Standard. I'm Hannah Prince, Communications Manager at PFC International, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion. Thank you for joining us as we introduce this important revision to PFC's project certification requirements, one that will make sustainable project sourcing even more accessible, consistent, and transparent. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Today's session is being recorded and the recording will be shared with all participants afterwards. You can also submit your questions at any time using the Q&A function here in Zoom. We'll gather them throughout the session and answer as many as possible at the end of the webinar. Today's webinar is focusing on the new PFC Project Sourcing Standard, which is now open for public consultation. This standard builds on our existing project certification approach, enabling project teams from construction and interior design to infrastructure and events to demonstrate that the materials they use come from sustainably managed sources. It's a key part of our work to strengthen traceability and responsible sourcing across global supply chains, ensuring that certified forest and tree-based materials can be tracked confidently from forests to the final project. For those of you joining us for the first time today, here's just a short introduction to PFC, the Programme for the Endorsement of Forest Certification. PFC is a global non-profit organisation promoting sustainable forest management through independent third-party certification. We were founded more than 25 years ago by small and family forest owners who wanted a system that worked for them, one that was inclusive, practical, and adapted to local realities. And that approach remains at the heart of PFC today. Rather than one global sustainable forest management standard, we endorse national and regional certification systems developed locally and adapted to each country's environmental, social, and economic conditions, all aligned with PFC's globally recognised benchmarks. Today, nearly 50 national systems are part of PFC, covering around 300 million hectares of certified forests. To this, we can add more than 30,000 certified companies worldwide, making PFC one of the largest and most trusted forest certification systems in the world. At its heart, forest certification is about trust and transparency. PFC certification ensures that forests are managed sustainably, protecting biodiversity, supporting local livelihoods, and maintaining ecosystem services. It's built around two main certifications: sustainable forest management, which ensures forests are managed responsibly, balancing environmental, social, and economic values, and chain of custody, ensuring that certified materials are traceable throughout the entire supply chain, from the forest and the processing mill through manufacturers and to the final project or product. This traceability is essential. It provides assurance that when you see the PFC label, you can trust that the forest or tree-based material originates from sustainably managed forests. It's what connects sustainable forest management to real-world impact, from local forest owners to global brands and construction projects. To complement our chain of custody certification, PFC developed project certification, a flexible approach for one-off projects involving multiple suppliers, materials, or partners. It allows teams to demonstrate that a specific project, such as a building, renovation, or exhibition structure, uses responsibly sourced PFC-certified materials, even when not all suppliers hold a chain of custody certificate themselves. Over the years, this approach has been used in some incredible projects, including the restoration of Notre Dame de Paris, the London 2012 Olympic Park, the Mount Fuji World Heritage Centre, and the Sydney Metro Northwest. Each of these projects showcases how certification brings sustainable forestry principles to life in tangible, visible ways, from concept to construction. Building on that experience, PFC is now evolving the system with the new Project Sourcing Standard. This new standard makes project certification clearer, more flexible, and more consistent, reflecting the growing variety of project types and supply chains. It strengthens requirements around traceability, improves guidance for project management, and aligns with the latest market expectations for responsible sourcing. The goal is simple: to make it easier for anyone, from architects and contractors to procurement teams, to confidently integrate PEFC certified materials into their projects. And as part of our open, inclusive approach to standards development, this new standard is now available for public consultation. The consultation is open now, and it runs until the 23rd of December. Taking part is really straightforward. You simply fill in a short online form. You receive an email with links and instructions on how to access the draft document and share your feedback. Public consultations are a real vital part of our standards development process. They ensure that we gather perspectives and expertise from across sectors and regions. Every comment we receive is carefully reviewed and receives a response, and it really helps us to shape a final standard that is both credible but also practical. So, if you work with certified materials, manage sourcing for projects, or are simply interested in responsible construction, we really do encourage you to take part and make your voice heard. And I will be sharing a few more instructions on how you can take part right at the end of this webinar. So, to explore all this in more detail, I am delighted to be joined by 3 members of the PEFC international team who have all been directly involved in the development of this new standard. First, we have Marta Martinez-Pardo, our certification program senior manager, who leads the PEFC certification program and oversees the development of the project sourcing standard. We then have Jonathan Tibbets, our project certification lead, who has been closely involved in the drafting process and will also share some insights today from the built environment. And Huang Maggie, certification program officer and project sourcing certification coordinator, who is coordinating the revision and the development of this project sourcing standard. So just a quick reminder before we dive in, if you do have any questions for the speakers, please submit them at any time during the Q&A app, and we'll address as many as we can at the end of the webinar. So with that, I'm delighted to begin the panel discussion part of today's webinar. So the first part will touch a bit more on the history of project certification, how it began, and why it's being transformed into project sourcing certification. And we'll also look a little bit on how the standard was developed. We'll then look more closely at the benefits of the PEFC project sourcing certification for the built environment sector, how it works in reality for organizations that are implementing it, and what some of the key innovations within this new standard are. So with that, I'll go straight to my first question. And Marta, I think this one is for you, and important to help us set the scene for the rest of this discussion. Maybe you could tell us quite simply, what is a certification standard such as the PEFC project sourcing standard we're discussing today, and how does it work in reality?
Thanks for the question, Hannah. I guess it's quite a good one to start framing the discussion. So, a standard is a set of requirements that are applicable to a specific sector and creates a shared language and interoperability within the sector. And what is even more important, and what I would like to highlight, is this part of the shared language. How does it work in the PEFC world? So what PEFC does is that convenes a group of stakeholders that are involved in certain sector. In our case, is the forestry sector. Concretely for this one, for the project sourcing, was stakeholders that are part of the construction certification bodies, accreditation bodies, technical experts, green building representatives. And we bring people working within a sector together. We enable a dialogue, and they come together with the requirements through consensus. This is transposed into what the standard is, that creates this shared language within the sector, can be implemented, and it goes beyond borders. So it creates this kind of shared understanding that can be implemented and audited.
Thank you very much, Marta. I think super important for us to really understand what we're talking about here today. So maybe now we can go a little bit back to the beginning and look at PEFC project certification and why we developed it.
To me, the question, sorry?
Yes, Marta, I think you're the perfect person to answer
Sure.
this one.
Yeah, sure. So, why project certification? So, to start with, we need to consider that projects usually involve many parties and many parties that are sourcing for the project. What happens that traceability, when it gets into the project, as per the chain of custody, regular chain of custody requirements, is broken because we don't have one actor controlling the sourcing and the selling of the product. Suddenly, there are many actors involved, many organizations, and traceability cannot be maintained. PEFC realized of this and realized that there was a need to create a specific standard to enable traceability without overcomplicating the tracking of the materials. And that's how project certification started. In any case, if I may, I would like to hand over to Huang because she can give us also the picture of the history of how project certification has evolved.
Thank you, Marta. So as Hannah mentioned earlier, so PEFC project certification isn't new. And the first certified project was the lighthouse building at the Zaragoza Expo in Spain back in 2008. So, and followed by the London Olympic Game in 2012, which became the world's first dual PEFC and FSC project certifications. And at that time, there was no specific project requirement, so both projects were certified against the regular PEFC chain of custody standard. In 2014, PEFC issued a guidance document called the Guidance 2001, and which is for the first time that we introduce and provide clarifications on how to apply chain of custody requirement to projects. And this really helped create increased uptake. And now we have 56 certified projects across 10 countries. But also we identify that the guidance also reveals several challenges and it leaves room for interpretations. New languages is not very familiar to the built environment sectors. Lacking clear requirements for the standard user, and because it's also non-normative, the enforcement has been difficult. So with all of the experience and feedback and recognizing the challenges in 2020, the PEFC chain of custody working group agreed that there's need for full revisions. And however, the revision process didn't start until 2024. So last year, late last year, because UDR and RED is coming in. So late 2024 until now, we have started with revision process. And the objective of this process is really to bring the project certification requirements aligned with the revised PEFC chain of custody standard, and especially to align with the stakeholder needs and the current market and regulations that we have now.
Thank you very much, Huang. And thank you, Marta, as well. It's interesting to hear where project certification started and where we're moving towards. Perhaps my next question, it really follows on from what Huang was just speaking about, and how project certification, why it has now transformed into becoming this new project sourcing standard, why we chose to develop a new standard over what we already have, sort of building on from what Huang has just explained. Perhaps Marta, you could provide a bit of extra information on this.
So within time and learning from how project certification has been implemented, the task force realized that the chain of custody is not 100% fit for purpose for projects. And one of the key points was oftentimes a project takes long to be developed. It's not a continuous process where you are developing a product like, let's say, for example, a packaging company is going to continuously develop packaging For projects, there may be an organization that is doing projects regularly. However, each project takes a long period of time. And there was no way to communicate about the project during the production process. When you have a project that is an applicant project, if we implement the chain of custody requirements, you cannot say much. However, the organization that holds the certificate is doing an effort, has a management system in place, is the full sourcing process that it's included and covered by the certification. That's why we moved from project certification to project sourcing, to give visibility to this fact of the process that an organization is going to set up to be able to have at the end of this process a certified project. In addition to that, we realized that projects is, of course, something in the construction environment, but not only. There are plenty of projects that are built up using forest and tree-based materials, such as a hiking path, such as playgrounds. And we realized that this tool can be a great communication tool, also, not only communication, also to make sure that they are sourcing responsibly for a town hall when they are developing a kindergarten, a playground, that they can also set up requirements for the process and have at the end of the day a playground that is PEFC certified through this project sourcing.
Fantastic. So it really helps not only improve what we had before, but also in extending the scope to so many more options. So at the beginning of the webinar, I spoke a little bit about PEFC chain of custody certification and how it provides traceability of forest and tree-based materials through the supply chain. And this brings me to ask, as you have talked about both, what are the differences between PEFC project sourcing and PEFC chain of custody certification?
Thank you, Hannah, for following the flow, because I'm already started touching on that one, and it's a key point. One of the main differences between project certification and chain of custody, it's specifically that for chain of custody, you have one organization that is controlling the full process. There may be some subcontractors, but the subcontractors don't get legal procurement rights, and they are controlled by the audit of the organization. And it's the organization that is sourcing the material, producing something, selling the material. What happens within a project, that we have many more actors involved. Within a project, there are many actors that potentially will be sourcing for the project, that will be conducting installation activities, and it's a much more complex arena. That's one of the main differences. Another difference is that usually a chain of custody certified product has a production process that is shorter, whereas a project, we can currently have a project that is going to last 8 years. It's a big construction field. This is nothing that happens in a couple of months. It's a long process. From the moment that an organization gets certified, after the initial audit, to the moment they will have the final product, in this example is 8 years. Average, it's between 2 and 3 years. So there is a full period where they hold a certificate, and through project certification, they can claim that a project may be an applicant project. Chain of custody doesn't allow this. Another key difference is that for chain of custody, once you have a product at the end, let's say a wooden toy, in order for a wooden toy to be considered as PEFC certified, all the elements of the wooden toy must be accounted. So you cannot have, or a table, you cannot have the legs of a table PEFC certified and the main core of the table is not, and apply certifications only to the core. With project certification is a little bit different because there are big components. So certification can apply to the full project or to specific components. So you could use PEFC certification if you only have control of the roof. You could get PEFC certification only for the roof of your building, for instance.
Thank you, Marta. I think, we will touch on a few of the components that you spoke about in there later as well, covering some of the innovations. But I think it's clear that there is really a significant difference in how these two certifications work, while, of course, always working together. I I said at the beginning that this new standard is currently under public consultation, which is a really critical element of our standards development process. Perhaps, Huang, you could just say a few words more specifically on how this standard was developed and, importantly, who was involved in the development of this standard.
Thank you, Hannah. Yes, so the revision process followed the former PEFC process, which includes several stages to ensure that the standards are developed in a transparent, consistent, inclusive, and specifically consensus-based way. And so we start with a proposal where the new project is approved. And then we have next a working group or task force is formed to draft the standard and reach agreement through consensus. So it's not just a one person dropping all the requirement behind the computer, but there are a whole group of experts behind. And as earlier Magda also mentioned, that the standard, that's how the standard making process is. The whole group of experts who convene together with a shared purpose, and specifically for project certification, it is the same. So PEFC established a task force of experts with diverse background, and they are construction professional certification bodies and PEFC national members, and they are from different continents as well. We are achieving consensus on a working draft is really essential. And if a full agreement is not reached among the task force member, the draft that you see today cannot go to the the public consultation. And it is also, I think it's important to note that since the PEFC chain of custody working group, it leads these revisions, there's an additional layer of approval. The chain of custody working group also must reach consensus before the draft is released for public consultations. So the draft that you see today within this public consultation period was agreed upon by two separate working groups, and the task force, after multiple intensive meetings and held in January this year. And here we are at the public consultations today. And also in parallel, there is the pilot project that being developed to test and validate the proposed approach in practice. And so after the consultations, the project certification task force and chain of custody working group, we also need to reach consensus on the final draft before it goes through the highest authority, which is the PEFC General Assemblies. And the PEFC General Assembly is composed of all the PEFC national and international stakeholder members who will then vote and provide the final approval before the publication stage, which will then disseminate all the approved standards, ensure accessibilities, and define any transition agreement for the implementations. And finally, we don't stop there. The standards are then periodically reviewed and updated to maintain the relevance and credibilities, and usually this process is every 5 years. So you can see that the standard development is a long and intensive process. And for project sourcing standard, this process approximately take almost 1.5 years to complete. And so we aim to have the standard ready for the approval stage, which is to be voted and achieve final approval at the PEFC General Assembly in May 2026, followed by a publication stage late May and beginning of June 2026.
Thank you very much, Huang. So we can set our calendars for May, June next year, so we can see this brand new standard ready and in action. But it's great to hear a really concise overview of what is, as you say, a long process, but a process that's important to ensure that as many people from different backgrounds, different knowledge, different experience is involved in making this standard as good as it can be. So thank you very much. So I think now we've kind of got a good idea of why we have this new standard, how it was developed. I'd like to dive a little bit more into some of the key innovations with this in the standard, and importantly, of course, for everyone listening today, the benefits of this standard. So I think now we will move over to Jonathan. I have a few questions now for you, and I think maybe start with quite a simple question, and that is, why is this new project sourcing standard interesting for the built environment sector?
Thanks, Hannah. That's a great question. Good to get into it. Martha's already teased out some of the innovations that we can talk to in a little bit more detail. But I think that the takeaway here for me, and it really goes to the heart of what PEFC delivers, is the connection between the sustainable forest management and the certified supply chain through a chain of custody. If we think about the built environment, we know that construction is one of the most materially intensive industries globally. And what we're seeing around the world is this growing expectation for more and more supply chain transparency and associated information related to the environmental impact of those products. We know that developers and contractors want to be confident that the material they use in a project are sourced sustainably. When it comes to forest and tree-based materials, they want to know there's legal harvest. And if you look at the different regulatory environments around the world, traceability back to origin is now a must. The challenge is for large construction projects, there are complex supply chain and various tiers of contractors that involved. Materials pass through many hands before they're fabricated, processed, delivered to site or installed. As Marta mentioned, there can be different parties who are responsible for procurement of different elements or components within a project. So project sourcing certification provides a framework to manage that complexity. It's not a one-stop shop, it's not the silver bullet, but it allows organizations to demonstrate that the certified material, components, suppliers, contractors, and other service providers are part of a controlled and verifiable system. In simple terms, and what attracted to me about working on this project is often finished construction projects in the built environment, they're the most visible public link between a sustainable forest and the completion of a certified supply chain. So in simple terms, Hannah, that's where I see project certification. I see some of that continued, throughput from the market in the construction sector, looking for the material origin and the traceability. There's probably more that I could go into, but I'll park it there for the moment.
Thank you. I can imagine we could have a whole session just on this, and maybe that will come in the future. I think another important element, probably for our audience here today, is how does it work in practical terms? What does project sourcing certification look like from an organizational perspective? And perhaps particularly interesting here is how it works as that umbrella within an organization and then the project members.
Yeah, it's really good to think practically. I'm sure certainly the four of us here on the PEFC end of things can relate. Certification and standards can be incredibly technical and they can take time to get your head around. Whilst we want the standards to be robust and deliver credibility to the market, we don't want them to be out of touch with reality. So it's important that through the development process that Hung talked to, we've got a task force that is well represented by the different actors within that supply chain, whether they're construction experts, whether they're people who have experience auditing or working for assessment bodies, they're all in the mix. Why is there this complexity? If we think about it in practical terms, you've often got a main contractor or a principal contractor. That language varies around the world. You might have a project manager or the developer. What they do for project sourcing certification is they establish and maintain what we'd refer to as a project sourcing management system that defines the boundaries of the project and the scope. It looks at the different certified materials and project elements that are involved. It looks at the different project actors and defines their roles and responsibilities, making sure that all of the participants who are contributing to that project are covered. And under that umbrella, that's a really good term. So under that umbrella management system, it means that all of the project members, whether they're different types of contractors or fabricators or subcontractors or installers, different service providers, those parties who might not have their own individual chain of custody certification are able to participate through the higher level management system. So whether that's the principal contractor or the project manager or the developer, those downstream of the organization who's going for certification can be covered, which is, as Marta mentioned, that is unique and distinct from chain of custody. In a construction setting, this provides more flexibility without the assurance being compromised. And we acknowledge that we've designed this understanding the reality of how construction processes work. You've got very different sourcing and installation responsibilities throughout the life of the project. And if you've got a project running for a long time, the nature of those procurement and sourcing and installation responsibilities changes year in, year out. So when you're thinking about certification and verification and how do you audit and assess the system, it's important that the umbrella has broad enough coverage so that the complexity of the structure and the different actors is catered to. And what we've tried to do, and we're open to public consultation, so we do want to hear your feedback and we want to know what you think. But from the perspective of the task force, we've made a real effort to try and keep what we're doing grounded in language relevant to the sector. I'm not sure if I've explained it in enough practical terms, but you've got a system under that umbrella, you've got the different actors, and that's how it works in a nutshell.
Thank you. And I guess all we can say is we encourage everyone to read the draft standards, take a look at all of these comments and and give their feedback, because that's the only way we can really ensure that the standard matches expectations and what the market requires. So I think it's fair to say we know we're not in a vacuum. It's not just PFC. So I think it's also interesting to know how the PFC Project Sourcing certification aligns with internationally recognized green building systems, ones such as LEED or BREEAM. Perhaps you could speak a little about this, Jonathan?
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I'm sure if people do have questions in this space, like that's the type of thinking that one starts doing. That alignment with the green building frameworks is one of the strengths of the standards, and it builds on the existing recognition that PEFC already has through its sustainable forest management and chain of custody certification around the world. So we're not doing something totally out of the ordinary here. Like, there is great recognition for the PEFC certification schemes and standards globally. But what these frameworks generally, like you mentioned, whether it's LEED or BREEAM or Green Star here in my home country in Australia, or you've got DGNB, or you've got CASB and Nordic Swan, there's a whole heap. I'm sorry if I've missed some. If your national scheme hasn't been mentioned, my apologies. Whilst they're all unique in their own right, generally speaking, they reward responsible sourcing and the transparency of the material. And what PEFC Project Sourcing provides is verifiable evidence that a project's forest and tree-based products are legally harvested and responsibly sourced. How this works is that directly supports credits, depending on the different scheme, for responsible sourcing of materials or the different requirements around the responsible use of products. It also helps get the information that's related to the environmental impact of the product or the associated embodied carbon or other lifestyle assessment reporting data that's generally available through those producing, mass timber, for example. So because PEFC certification already covers due diligence and the country of harvest and traceability, it also helps with getting the information that you need when it comes to public reporting and source disclosure. So in a way, it acts as a bridge between the technical assurance of certification and then the various performance metrics depending on the scheme in the green building world. So it's not a one-stop shop, but it certainly links up with what you're required to do, and it helps you on your reporting journey, making sure that as far as forest and tree-based materials are covered, you tick the boxes that you need.
Fantastic, thank you. I really like how you said it really works as that bridge, which I think is so important. So now I would really love to hear a little bit about some of the key innovations in this new standard and, you know, how they respond to the stakeholder needs that we have identified over nearly 2 decades of working on project certification. I think a couple have already been mentioned a little bit as we've gone through, but it would be great to put together 1 or 2, 3 of those key innovations that you feel is in this standard. Perhaps we can start with you, Jonathan, and we can work around everyone.
Good question. How do we break it down? Look, and that's a scary thought as well. If we think about 2008 being nearly 2 decades ago, we've seen a good number of projects from around the world, as we've already mentioned here. Look, our sample size is modest, but 3 innovations which I think are worth sharing, at least on this webinar, that we hope support greater adoption, and if not greater adoption, they're responding to the needs of the sector. The first would be the concept of multi-project certification. So this allows organizations to operate a continuous project management system where multiple projects can be added. We're hoping this reduces duplication and unnecessary costs. And this is also in response to direct stakeholder feedback, some expert opinion that we've gathered along the way. And it reflects the reality that most construction companies don't just build one thing and then stop. They're in a continual cycle of building and refining and tendering and designing and estimating. A second innovation that maybe one of the others could talk to is this idea about applicant projects. So we've got a pathway to communicate about the project and the good work that's happening behind the scenes during the construction phase, not just having to wait 2, 3, 5 years until the building's finished. And another real innovation, and this is from an outsider's perspective coming into PFC, this is also a real strength. So if we look at small to medium-sized enterprises and the barriers that they often come up against when they think about certification, the standard has provided a pathway for small to medium-sized enterprises to participate in a group model that allows them to collectively share a project sourcing management system. We're hoping that's more inclusive and accessible. Also, as we've touched on here, an innovation that I really want to emphasize, we've talked pretty heavy about the construction sector, but project sourcing certification isn't just for massive buildings where there's a lot of timber. That's a real innovation for us, looking at the scope of projects and how scopes can be different for different actors in a project. And in a construction environment, you might have an organization that wants certification, but they're just responsible for the shell and core of a building. So we need to provide a facility where if they want to pursue certification, they can get certification for the shell and the core of the building, even though they might not be responsible for the interior fit out or the cladding. And the example that Marta mentioned under chain of custody, you can't really separate a table. You can't make an emphasis on the legs and ignore the table. That's generally because one company makes the whole table. For some of these projects that we're looking at, you have many different actors or project managers with a variety of responsibilities throughout the life cycle. But yeah, hear from the rest of the panel. But they're my takeaways.
Thank you. I think it was a fantastic overview of some of the key innovations, and I think really exciting to be able to share them today. Huang, perhaps you could share a few more words on the applicant project innovation in this new standard.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Thanks, Jonathan. And before I dive into the applicant projects, so just to reiterate that a project is it's not just a construction, but it's any type of building and renovation or creative work that use wood or other porous and tree-based materials. So it can be anything from a single structure to a group of buildings or outdoor spaces like home, bridges, the playground, parks, or artwork. So all within a defined location and scope. And so you have here the applicant project was up during Marta's speech, and that is our second key innovations and the concept of applicant project. So an applicant project refers to a project still under development. Of course, it is not yet the PEFC certified until the project is completed. And so this new concept is particularly helpful for the project that lasts over 12 months. And with PEFC chain of custody requirements, currently organization cannot communicate anything about their certification process until the product is certified. With this applicant project concept, the PEFC project sourcing standard allows the organization to really communicate early that they have a verified management system and verified by a certification body in place to ensure the responsible sourcing of forest and tree-based material throughout the project's development.
Thank you. I think this one is so exciting now because it gives companies the opportunity to communicate while the building is being built, not just once it's finished. So I think it's a fantastic new development. So we've heard about three key innovations, and as Jonathan mentioned briefly, we have something quite interesting around SMEs, so small and medium enterprises. And as I did mention at the beginning, PEFC certification has always strived to be inclusive and to be practical, and it's vital for us that the smaller companies are able to achieve certification. So Marta, maybe you could conclude with the last innovation and explain a little bit how this new standard does support it and how this SME development comes in.
So SME, in the current chain of custody, we have what we call producer groups, which are groups of independent entities, independent companies that are seeking for certification, and they do it through a group that facilitates the establishment of the management system. There is a central office that is going to facilitate relationship with CVs, the procedures that they need to set up and put in place. With project sourcing certification, the working group and the task force acknowledge that there are many small companies that are involved within those processes, and certification cost can be quite high in some cases for a specific product to be maintained. In addition to that, as part of the task force, we had a representative that is managing producer groups, and that brought us the reality of how helpful it would be to have an approach for small companies to be able to join these producer groups, these SME groups, to access project certification. So the task force discussed, and that's what we have put in place, that through a common management system and through a central office, different SMEs can be part of such a group and access project sourcing certification.
Thank you. I think it really just keeps with the ethos of PEFC that certification should be accessible to anyone, no matter their size. So thank you all three for your key innovations. It was really fantastic to hear them. Hong, I have just a quick question for you. You did mention earlier that there is a pilot project happening in parallel to the public consultation. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit more about what this involves and, importantly, who can take part. Oh, Hong, I'm afraid we can't hear you.
Sorry about that.
Perfect.
So pilot project is an important part of the standards development, and the main objective are to test the requirements and identify guidance, clarification and training needs. And it is for applicant organization and certification body, so the standard user. And the process really includes engagement between applicant organizations and certification bodies. application stage, implementation of the requirement, and internal audit by the applicant organizations, and external audit of the application organization by the certification body in conclusion. So it's really follow the regular cycle. A typical pilot project is 6 months. So, and if you are an organization who foresee to have your project certified and responsible for overseeing and managing the project sourcing certification process and ensure compliance with the standard and would like to volunteer for a project, please contact us to standards@pfc.org.
Thank you, Rob. We'll put the contact details also at the end of this webinar. So if you do want to get involved, or if you have any questions for us later, you can always get in contact with us. So that will be provided later. So I think I have one more question before we move on to the Q&A. And I think, Jonathan, this one comes to you. And it's just, if you could summarize some of the key benefits of this new standard for organizations within the built environment sector. I know we've covered a lot, but perhaps we can just end with something, a little summary to leave people with as we prepare for the Q&A.
Sure. I'll try, Hannah. How are we going for time? I'm sure we're all itching to jump into the Q&A, but at its core, PEFC certification, whether it's project sourcing, forest management, or chain of custody, is about the independent verification through third-party auditing. That means that an accredited certification body, not PEFC or not the organization running a management system, conducts an audit to check for compliance against the standard. This means it's impartial and it's what gives certification its strength. So when we think about the construction sector here, it's not a self-declaration, it's assessed and it's verified and it's maintained through surveillance, especially in the context of project certification for multiple projects. This point it's really critical. We need to make sure that sustainability claims aren't just marketing statements. We need these to be backed by credible, internationally recognized certification systems. And at the end of the day, PEFC Project Sourcing certification is about building that trust and social license in the built environment as well. It's about responsible sourcing and it's about traceability. It links the beginning of the supply chain, whether that's the forest, to the end of the supply chain. And what we're talking about here is the buildings that people live and work in or learn in. And as we've mentioned here, like in the future, we hope it can include things like hiking trails or playgrounds or other public spaces. Probably the key takeaway here when we think about forest and tree-based products and we think about climate positive construction or sustainable materials, those promises relating to the renewability of the resource or the sustainability of the material is only as strong as the system that verifies it. And that's what project sourcing certification does. It's verification that there is responsible sourcing, that the environmental management that underpins the forest is verified all the way through the supply chain until a component is installed in a building. That means we're trying to ensure, through certification that the buildings we're making and the buildings that are getting certified are helping do their bit to a sustainable, low carbon future built environment where claims can be backed.
Thank you so much.
I'll stop there.
I think pretty concise. You did a great job. So brilliant. So I'd like to first thank all three of you for sharing your knowledge today. It's been fascinating for me to learn more about where this standard came from, why it was needed, and really importantly, those benefits it's going to bring to the built environment sector. So a big thank you to all three of you for sharing today. So with that, I am delighted for us to start the Q&A section and have a little look at all the questions that you have sent us. Unfortunately, Fong has just had a problem with her Wi-Fi, so she will try and join us if she can, but if not, we have Marta and Jonathan here. So we've had a few questions come in, but we do have about 8 minutes for the questions. So if you do have some, please do share them in the Q&A app and we'll get through as many as we can. I think the first one, probably for you, Marta, is asking about the certification cycle and how it will look under the project sourcing standard, specifically how many audits would be conducted.
So for as we have explained earlier, I think it was Jonathan who touched upon this point. There are two types of project sourcing certificates: for one-time projects and for multi-projects. Certificates issued to multi-projects have the same audit requirements and audit cycle as regular chain of custody. It will be a 5-year certificate according to the draft. We will see, depending on the comments we receive, this may change. But according to the current draft in consultation, 5-year cycle with an initial audit and a recertification audits and regularly annual audits, surveillance audits for in between the certification cycle. For one-time projects, it will be at least an initial audit and a final audit, and if they last more than 18 months, also surveillance audits in the middle.
Thank you very much, Marta. We also have a question about recordings. The recording will be made available. We'll have it on the website and you'll also receive it via email, so no worries there. We also have a question looking more at the project members within a project and sort of how organizations that would be project members, how it would work for them in maybe quite a general way. What would they need to do? Perhaps, Jonathan, something you could speak about a little bit?
Sure. Good question. In a very general way, the organization who puts up the umbrella, so they establish the management system, and then in the management system there are a whole lot of roles and responsibilities, as well as processes and documented information that's required by the standard. There are specific requirements that have been established for what you need to do and receive from your project members. So that outlines the roles and responsibilities, any types of agreements you have with them. You can think of project members as either having their own existing chain of custody certification or project members who aren't yet certified, and there are slightly different approaches in terms of how you would induct or onboard them into your procurement policies, how you would consider what they do from a internal audit perspective as well. But in a nutshell, they would follow the roles and responsibilities that both parties have agreed to. And in terms of sourcing of material, when it's a certified product that's coming through, you have to follow the requirements to make sure that the claim is true and correct. And where there isn't a certified product coming in, you have to follow the due diligence requirements as will be required under chain of custody as well. We can get more technical if there's an appetite, but yeah, in a nutshell, that's a general approach.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Marta, I think one for you. I think we must have an auditor on the call. They ask, what does an auditor need to do to be able to provide audits against this new standard?
The standard forces 3 different ways or enables 3 different ways. Is to be already a chain of custody qualified auditor, PEFC chain of custody, and then you just need to take the specific training and you are qualified. Another way is you are not yet a PEFC chain of custody qualified auditor, but you comply with all the requirements to become. You follow that pathway, you get qualified for chain of custody, and you take the project sourcing requirements standard training. And the third way, the one that changed a little bit from the standard 2003, is for green building assessors. auditors for green building assessors or assessors for green building certification can also become qualified to provide certification against our PEFC project sourcing requirements by taking training and getting certain competencies. That would be it.
And I think we can say that if there are any auditors or CBs on this webinar now, we are actually holding later today. So at 3 o'clock Central European time, we are holding another webinar that looks specifically at what this entails for certification bodies. So if you're online now, you have more questions. This afternoon will be a great webinar for you to join. Because I do see we do have just another question about training for auditors and if that's something we plan to provide. Don't know if Marta, you could say a quick word on that.
Yes, and the answer is yes. Yes, we will provide a specific training for this specific standard for both the project sourcing standard and the requirements for CVs auditing against the standard.
Because that's something we haven't really touched upon so much today, that with this new project sourcing standard, there's a complementary standard specifically for certification bodies who will be auditing against the new project certification. So please join us this afternoon if you have more questions on that. Maybe one final question, I think maybe coming to you, Jonathan, whether you could talk a little bit about the relationship between our PEFC chain of custody standard and the new project sourcing standards.
Sure. So that's a really good question, because I guess since 2008, or definitely since 2012, they've effectively been one and the same, with the exception that in 2014 there was specific guidance on how you audit the chain of custody standard for project certification. There was a lack of normative requirements, so that's kind of one of the reasons we've embarked on this project, and it's resulted in the project sourcing standard. Probably the best example would be project certification would typically be the final link in a chain of custody. Not for a consumer product, if we're not thinking packaging or tables or chairs, but if we're thinking built environment or public amenities, it's the final extension, that the most public and visible link of the chain of custody. There are some really key differences between chain of custody and project certification. We've touched on a couple of them. I mentioned a few, Marta mentioned a couple also. The best way to think about it is projects aren't as time-bound because they exist for many months, or in some cases many years. It's not a traditional production process. I'm not saying that chain of custody products can't take a long time to build, because I know that they can, but there's that element there. There's the really obvious difference in scope. So some of the people on the webinar might be familiar with PEFC's project certification for the roof structure of Notre Dame de Paris. So that's an example where not the complete project, but a portion of the project, a structural element of the project, is certified for project certification. In chain of custody, you can't make claims specific to one element of, we'll stick with the example of a table. We can't separate the legs of the table from the top of the table. And that's a clear way that, project certification is really distinct from chain of custody.
Thank you very much. So just in time, I think we come to the end of our Q&A. Thank you both for your answers, and I will briefly conclude our webinar today. So I just wanted to finish today with just a couple of key takeaways and why you should be excited about this new standard that's on its way. So firstly, it will bring certainly greater flexibility and clarity. So the new standard will make certification easier to apply across different types of projects, from major infrastructure down to small scale builds. We have stronger traceability and transparency, so it provides a clear, verifiable framework for managing complex supply chains and communicating sustainability throughout the project lifecycle. And finally, more inclusive and accessible certification. With innovations like multi-project and the SME groups, organizations of all sizes will be able to demonstrate their commitment to responsible sourcing. So in short, together, we're making sustainable construction simpler, clearer, and more impactful. Final word on the consultation, and we really do encourage you to read the standard, give your feedback. It makes a huge difference in our standard development process. So the consultation, it's open now. It runs until the 23rd of December. To access the standard, you just need to fill in this form. So you can go to this link or scan the QR code. As soon as you fill in the form, you'll get an email. That email has the instructions on how you can give your feedback and the link to the standard. So then you can access the standard, give your feedback, and every comment that is made does get a response. So I really do urge you to take a look at this standard, have a read, give us your feedback so we can make this standard as strong and as user-friendly as possible. So with that, I would really like to thank my colleagues today for their sharing their expertise. So thank you to Marta, to Jonathan, and to Paul. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining us today, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on the standard. If you do ever have any more questions, you can contact us at any time at standards@pfc.org, and we will be happy to reply to you. As I said, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar and the slides, and if there's anything else, please don't hesitate to get in contact. So a big thank you from me and the whole PFC International team, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye from us.